Daisy, and this is Loki. And if you have clicked on this video, there's a good chance that you found me through our communications class, and I just want to say how happy I am that you took the initiative to come find out what I have to say about rhetoric and how it could help you in the future with other assignments, when you go into the workforce, things like that. So yeah, thank you so much for clicking, and let's just jump right into it. So for this video and for the sake of you guys, I wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer and just say that if you saw my presentation Friday and you actually paid attention, then some of the information may seem a little bit redundant, but I do go into more detail about not only the definition, but also how you can utilize those tactics and ultimately achieve whatever goal or purpose you're trying to achieve with your speech and any other communication that you want to achieve.
This is the agenda for the rest of the video. We're going to be talking about how to create a purpose. That way you have a direction for your argument. We're going to talk about why audience is important, how to use rhetorical devices, what they are, rhetorical situations you can find yourself in, and the way you can use rhetoric in your everyday life.
Okay, so first things first, when you are doing anything, you want to make sure that you have a goal, you have a distinct purpose laid out. That way, when you are compiling research or coming up with like kind of your thesis of your argument, if you are doing it from an argumentative stance, that you have a direction that you want to head towards, just so that you make sure that you don't lose sight of what you're actually trying to accomplish. Really, a lot of things in this theory build off of the previously mentioned step. So for your audience and your audience members, it really builds a lot off of your purpose. So if your purpose is to educate, the way in which you craft your statements and your overall, I guess I would say, presentation of it, that's not necessarily like speech presentation, but overall just like presenting the information, it will be different than when you are trying to persuade an audience. So again, that's why purpose is very important, but when we're talking specifically in regards to the audience, you also want to consider, is that audience going to be receptive to whatever information I'm trying to convey to them? Meaning, if you have an audience that is composed of people who would be opposed to your message, and you start off by saying, this is what I'm trying to say to you, and I want you to listen, they're immediately not going to listen. They're going to be closed off, and they're going to have their walls up, and they're not going to be as open. It's kind of just natural. So for those audience members, it's going to be a lot different in how you format and create your argument or like your presentation versus an audience member who are going to be more willing to learn your information. So if you're presenting to a group of teachers and you're a teacher yourself, and you're like, these methods of teaching prove to be the most effective, automatically those are the people who are going to be the primary target audience, and they're going to be more receptive to that information because it's specifically applicable to them, and obviously they agree with teaching and they're interested in learning. That's why they're at like a teaching conference. So trying to convey information to that group is going to be different than if you were someone who saw someone litter, like casually just litter, and you go up to them and you're like, hey, you shouldn't litter. Initially they're gonna be like, okay, yeah, whatever, like let me carry on throughout my day. They're not gonna be as receptive to that because obviously they don't care about littering, they don't care about the effects. So maybe you want to present the information differently. So instead of saying that statement of, hey, you shouldn't litter, maybe you can approach it in a different way. And we'll go through that, how you can use like logos, pathos, ethos, all those kinds of things. So an example would be like, this scientist, I don't know a scientist's name right now. He's a environmentalist. He says that when you litter, it creates devastation to ecosystems, and we'll say 40% of the litter that is put on the ground is responsible for killing the wildlife. And now you're ruining families of animals, and maybe like a turtle isn't able to take care of her young. Even though I think turtles lay their eggs and then kind of like dip, but whatever. So something like that. So you're using logos, ethos, and pathos in your argument instead of just saying that blanket statement. You know, the ethos is that credibility of like, hey, this researcher who's, you know, specializes in this information says this. The logos is like going to be the data, any type of like logical assessment. So the cause and effect that you brought up of like, you throw something away, this causes that. And then the pathos is going to be like, now these baby turtles are growing up in a habitat that's, you know, gonna eventually kill them. So that argument is gonna be a lot more effective than just saying like, don't litter. And I think you have a better chance of reaching that person and convincing that person not to litter. I would say that reaching an audience that is not naturally receptive, not naturally open, is going to be the toughest hurdle that anyone has when they are presenting any type of information. So yeah, so we don't want to rant about that one, but okay. Ethos is, obviously we talked about, it's going to be any type of credibility, and basically this makes the information that you will display later on seem more trustworthy. So if, you know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically credentials, it can also be the presentation of someone. So there's a scene in Brooklyn Nine-Nine where this guy shows up in a superhero costume and is basically like a vigilante in the city, and he goes to report a crime, but the cops don't take him seriously because of his presentation. He doesn't have a strong ethos about him. He doesn't seem credible. So therefore, whatever information he wants to get across, it's not going to get across because that initial reaction is that he's not a trustworthy source. Therefore, if he's not trustworthy, then I shouldn't listen to anything he has to say. Not necessarily a way that you should go about information, but a lot of times that's how things happen. This also, for example, we live in an era where there's a lot of fake news. So there's a movement where people are becoming more, I want to say they're becoming more aware, but people are becoming more aware of, all right, well, what news sources are more credible, what news sources are more reliable, more fact-worthy. Like, you're not going to go to The Onion for any like information because they're renowned for their satire, they're renowned for writing these like ridiculously silly articles. But you may be more inclined to go to a different news outlet that is considered more credible, and that's all about ethos. Logos is going to be anything that has to do with any type of data, like we're going to be talking about like evidence, anything that can create any type of like quantitative fact, anything that can be measured, that's going to fit under logos. And this kind of goes off of ethos, where it makes your argument seem more credible. It makes it seem like, okay, this person really did their research, this research is relaying this information, blah, blah, blah. The problem with logos is that even if you do display data, it's not always necessarily factual. Logos and like data can obviously be misleading, and that's something that you're going to have to navigate, not only for like when you're creating your presentation, but when you're also reviewing other people's information and things like that. That's important to talk about. Okay, so next up, we're going to be talking about pathos, and I think this is the easiest one to identify, and I would also argue that this is the most successful and the most used. So pathos is not limited to just speeches. So for example, I was a kid watching Nickelodeon, 10 years old, doing my thing. Next thing I know, I'm bawling my eyes out because that commercial with like the shaken dogs and like the wet cats and like they're in cages with that song like Arms of an Angel, that is just pure pathos right there. And that's not necessarily like they're not saying anything, they're showing you visuals that are going to pull in your heartstrings. And so like 12 years later, I still think about that commercial all the time. Anytime I hear that song, I'm like, nope, I cannot do it. So obviously I wasn't the primary target audience because I was 10, didn't have any money to donate, but it resonated deeply with me because of the pathos that they were able to use to get their message across of like, hey, these animals are suffering, like, listen to this sad song, aren't you sad, don't you feel guilty for not rescuing all these animals and donating, like, donate. So pathos is very, very strong because I want to say a lot of humans, but humans are primarily connected through emotions and connections, and we really crave relationships. So pathos is able to be really, really effective in this regard. So don't think that pathos is limited to words. Obviously in that setting they used a sad song, they used visuals that were emotionally distressing, but some words that you can think of when you are reading an article. So like angry versus outraged. That's going to be an example of using pathos. Sad versus like, what's a synonym for like sad that's really like, you could say devastated. So using strong words like that that are really emotional, those are also great examples of how pathos is used. So in journalism, if they want to get a certain message across without being like too blatantly obvious of how you should feel about it, they're going to use these really strong words. So be on the lookout for that, because after you've watched this video, you're gonna see that that's a thing. So the types of rhetoric, as far as like situations that we're going to be talking about, are going to be epideic, forensic, and deliberative. So epideic is going to be any type of ceremonial speech, and that's going to be like saying your wedding vows, or even the speech that you give when you're proposing to your partner, or a eulogy, any type of formal ceremonial speech. Next up is going to be forensic, and this is just going to be about like saying like whether or not you're innocent or guilty, and really this is just courtroom speech. And the reason that this is really in there is because Aristotle, when he was developing these these notes on rhetoric, he lived in ancient Athens, and a lot of their society revolved around democracy and trials and courtrooms. So when he was developing these notes on rhetoric, this obviously played a large role in that, because the culture which he lived in really focused and centered on that aspect. And then the next one is going to be deliberative, which is going to be more of your political speaking. So that's going to be like trying to like convince like legislators to pass a certain bill or like legislation, anything like that has to do with serving like the public. Yeah, so those are the types of situations that Aristotle saw rhetoric potentially being used about the canons. And there are, what, 5 canons? There are 5 canons. And so it's funny because when you look at the canons and you examine them, they fit into the 3 rhetorical devices. So leave a comment below of what canons you think would fit into what rhetorical device. I'm just curious to see if you think so too. So the first one we're going to be talking about is going to be invention, and this is using any type of reasoning and arguments in a speech. You're going to be using evidence, data, that kind of stuff. So that's going to be your invention. Arrangement is going to be how you decide to organize your speech. So the classic organization is going to be like your intro, your body, your conclusion, and then there's also, some subsections into those. So like for your intro, you have the intro, and then typically you have your thesis at like towards the end of the intro. In your body, you're going to have like an introductory sentence. There's a specific name for it, but and you're going to be giving basically like a headline to what evidence you're going to say after that. Typically there's like 3 or 4 different sections of evidence, and they're going to have that introduction, evidence, and like conclusion, like therefore like you should consider this evidence and whatever reason. And then your conclusion is going to be kind of answering your thesis, and really just giving a summary of the key information and being like, yeah, this is why you should care. Obviously, not everything has to be set up this way, but that's kind of the basic setup of like any type of like organization. So what this does is it adds credibility to your argument. You're presenting it in a way that seems logical, and it makes your argument really like look like, okay, that makes sense. Like they presented it in a way that really showed that there was like thought and effort into it. So it makes it more trustworthy. Incredible. So the next one is going to be style, and this is really just your choice of diction, your choice of how you kind of word things, and it allows your speech to be interesting and convey different ideas kind of more clearly. In this textbook it said straight and to the point is typically like the best method. I would say yes for the most part. You don't want to make it too confusing or like too convoluted, because then people will like lose what you're like saying. For example, I'm in a philosophy class right now, and I read a lot of papers where like, by the 15th page, I'm like, okay, what are you saying? Like, I have no clue. So like, in that regard, yes, maybe get straight to the point. But if you're trying to develop an argument or a presentation for an audience that is going to be less perceptive, then maybe figure out a strategic way to present your evidence without clearly defining the point you're going to make, just because this helps them get to that point on their own, and then they're going to be more like receptive to that argument and the point that you're trying to make. Okay, so delivery is going to be the next one, and this is going to be the tone in which you're speaking. So for me, growing up, my mom always used to say, it's not what you say, but how you say it. And so this is that. This is going to be how you say things and how is that message going to get across? There are a lot of times where people will sometimes have like a sarcastic air or like way about them, and so when they say something, personally for me, I'm like, okay, but are you serious? Like, I have no clue what you're trying to communicate, and even if you are trying to communicate that, whether or not I should believe you, because they have this like weird sarcastic tone. So yeah, so that's something to think about. You definitely want to practice your speech. Delivery is, I want to say it adds a lot to the credibility of whatever you're trying to get across. If someone doesn't seem really confident in whatever information that they're trying to convey to their audience members, it makes it seem like, you know, they're not confident in the evidence, in their argument, and therefore you as an audience member shouldn't be confident in it either. You shouldn't take it seriously or maybe even trust it. So delivery is very, very important. You want to make sure that your speech is clear. That way they can even like know what you're saying at all. Because if you don't know what that person's saying, then obviously you're not going to get the message. Consider pitch and the volume of your voice. You don't want to be screaming at them. I mean, maybe you do. It depends on your audience member. So like, maybe if you're in like a small group and it's like 4 of you guys and you're meeting in a cafe, you don't want to be screaming at them. But say you're at like a football game or like pep rally type thing and you're trying to get the crowd hyped up, then you can scream. Then you know what's appropriate as far as like level and pitch. Yeah, so you just want to make sure that your speech is not awkward and that it is smooth and coherent and natural. You don't want to try and be too formal, then people are going to be like, okay, this person's like a robot, like they're just weird, so we're not paying attention anymore. So that's very important too. So you want to think about how you're delivering the information that you're delivering. Next is going to be memory. So how are you storing the data? How are you recalling the data? And then knowing the topics makes it easier to articulate. So if someone is like presenting and they're just like reading from a note card and they're reading it word for word, they're gonna stumble a bit. It's gonna be harder to kind of go about communicating that information. So like right now I have like bullet points just so that I can kind of make sure I hit all the key points, but I don't have a script written, so that's why sometimes I take pauses, and you know, I definitely need to practice that. But yeah, so I don't have a script written because if I read straight from a script, it's not going to sound natural. That delivery is going to be ruined, and therefore my credibility is also going to be ruined. So it's, you know, a big domino effect. So you want to make sure that you know what you're talking about. That way you can present the information with confidence. You're clear about whatever you're presenting. And also, you know, if you're presenting and then people have questions at the end, if you don't know and you don't have the answers to that questions written, then you're just gonna look very, very silly and look like you have no clue what you're talking about, and then whatever work that you did put in is gonna be completely diminished within seconds. So that is very important and very crucial to know. Come here. Okay. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to be talking about is really, I think, one of the most important things to know when you are thinking and using rhetoric is you're absolutely not defined to using rhetoric in speeches and in presentations or in writings. You can use it in anything, in your simple conversations, to try and convince your employer to give you a raise. You can use it to even get a job. Yeah, so you can really use it in any circumstance. And one of the things that I like to think of when thinking about how to use rhetoric is, how do I use it in media? How do I use it in marketing a product? And how are you able to use it in your possible future career? So for me, a lot of things that I'm interested in is marketing. So how do I market this product? So when you're thinking of your target audience, you should probably think of it in a sense of like you're playing darts. So you have this big target, and the bullseye is going to be the main audience that you want to market this product to. But you also have the rest of the dartboard, and the arrow can be the metaphorical message or information that you're trying to get across. So with this, you're playing darts. You're not always going to hit the bullseye. Sometimes you hit on the outer sections of the dartboard, but that's also okay. So an example, a lot of times advertisements use specific language, colors, percentages, numbers, things like that to make audience members get interested in whatever they're trying to sell, whatever product. Have you ever been walking in a mall or in an outlet, and in the window you see this big sign and bright colors with 50 or 80% off, huge. It's taking up 90% of the poster, and then clearance is written really high. So even though you may not be interested in that specific store, I don't know what store, an ice cream store, and you're lactose intolerant, you're dang, I'm missing out on that deal. It got your attention, and that's important. That's ultimately what the advertisers want. They just want your attention, and they want you to know the information and carry it on. That I kind of came up with is an advertisement for 50% off of tires for an F-150 or something. I drive a Honda. I don't need tires for a big truck. So how are they going to be able to get me interested in this? And this is a specific example, but it has definitely happened to me before, where they're limited time deal, 50% off of whatever product we're trying to sell. And I'm immediately intrigued. I'm immediately interested, because those are key terms that are going to get anyone interested. It creates the idea that whatever product they're selling is becoming a rarity, that it's not easily accessible, and therefore, it puts pressure on the audience members, on the potential consumers, hey, if you ever even considered buying this product, you should definitely buy it now, because you're not going to be able to do it in the future. So it creates that pressure. It also creates that interest of ooh, why is it limited? What's the deal about? And then when you're told big numbers, 50%, or even when they say clearance sale, but then it's 10% off, those words get you interested. So even though I may not personally be their bullseye, their main target audience, I'm somewhere on the outskirts of that. I can then take that information that's with me, and I can relay that information to someone who didn't specifically hear that one advertisement. So then I become someone who is a walking advertisement for this information. I could see a dude at school, and he has a big truck, and I'm hey, do you need tires? I heard that so-and-so was having this huge limited time offer. it stuck with me. I just wanted to express that to you. That's an option. So I'm relaying this information. It stuck with me because of the way that they have presented and marketed their information. So that's a way rhetoric is used, especially with audiences. So whenever any company is marketing anything, they have a specific target audience, but they also make the specific campaign and different, like, how many times am I going to say marketing? But marketing strategies to get other people intrigued and interested so that they can then convert into that primary target audience. So that's a way that rhetoric can be used to make money even. Okay, so another example of how rhetoric doesn't have to be confined to just public speaking and presentation. Rhetoric can be used in visuals, so in ad campaigns. That's going to be the easiest to kind of examine. So I talked about earlier in the video about that really sad song with the videos of the cats and the dogs and all the other animals being in less than ideal conditions. So obviously that's rhetoric. They're using pathos there to convince you to get their message across, but also it can be used in print. So you're going to want to look at maybe font size, font in general, is it in bold, is it in cursive, things like that. Also, you're going to be wanting to examine it. Yep, you're going to want to examine colors as well. So for example, red is usually with urgency or aggression or things like that, and green is typically good, go, think of a green light. Colors are able to convey a lot, and you wouldn't necessarily think it initially, but it does convey a lot. So this can actually be related to the courtroom. So if you want to think about someone on trial, typically the way that they present themselves is a rhetorical strategy. So if you are on trial and you are the defendant, you're probably going to either be wearing white or blue, obviously dressed professionally, but white usually symbolizes innocence, and blue, a lot of people connect blue to someone being truthful or honest. So that's something maybe you can use if you go in for a job interview, wear blue, and then they're okay, they're honest. And this can even be seen in politics. So a lot of politicians, yes, they'll wear the black suits, but they'll also have ties that are either red or blue, and this could either be a nod to their specific political party, but also because it associates the idea of being patriotic, the colors of the United States, with them specifically. So then there becomes this subliminal messaging where they're saying hey, me in America, we're synonymous, we wear the same colors, so things like that. Those are rhetorical strategies, and they don't even involve words. So it's very important to just know about rhetoric. There's a lot of opportunities to discover how rhetoric will work for you, and I hope this video gave you a little bit more information that you didn't already know. But yeah, thank you so much for clicking, and I hope to see you in class. And if you're not in my class, thanks for clicking this video. Okay, bye.
The epideic or
Epideic. Okay. It's where people